Good morning, one and all. Good morning to the members of the panel. And I'm going to present them Professor Rabbi Avraham Gisser, Rabbi of Ofra, and the head of the Religious State Education at the Ministry of Education. Thank you very much for coming. Brigadier General Shlomo Brom, a senior research fellow at the INSS, and one of the experts, if not the expert, on Hamas. And we're going to use your know-how and knowledge vis-à-vis this issue. And Colonel Gilead Sher, who opened this panel.
Chair in the U.S. Middle East Policy at the Washington Institute, an expert on Arab and Islamic politics, and I'm sure most of the audience has had the chance to read your commentary on your enlightening commentary on the world media. So thank you so much for being here. And I will switch Hebrew to English.
Had I said to you a year ago that we're going to sit on this stage and we're going to talk about negotiations and about the 67 borders, yes or no, and a Secretary of State that I will not say like our Ministry of Defense and describe his adjectives, but I'll talk about his determination and his perseverance, and he takes both sides and tries to meet them and bring them together. And the King of Jordan, who invites Bibi Netanyahu and actually has a Photoshop with him. You might have said, oh, it couldn't possibly had. So in other words, what we should say as an assumption is that anything is possible in the Middle East. What seemed impossible a year ago will suddenly take place. But that doesn't solve our pessimism, and that we suddenly saw that something that we didn't believe could happen has happened, and most of the public and most of the people around the world have difficulty believing that this could take place. So I would like to take advantage of you in the panel and to say this round, this point of time that we find ourselves in, we heard from Khalil Shikaki that this is a very special moment. Is it different from the moments and the things that happened in the previous rounds? And if not, where will we go? Gilad Sher said as an infrastructure that Israel cannot wait and it must have a contingency plan immediately and think ahead. We have to think where it's going to take us to.
Dr. Satloff, and you know, Minister of Defense Boogie alone.
Maybe you should take the earphone out because I'm translating into Hebrew.
We have a Sabra type defense minister, and basically he said, and I'm going to rephrase.
למעשה הוא עשה, ואני אקרא לזה בצורה אחרת, זה לא יהפוך לכותרת. אתם האמריקאים, אתם פשוט לא מבינים. הנה אתם באים, אתם נאיבים. הנה מזכיר המדינה. למה אתם חושבים שזה בכלל דבר שאפשר לפתור אותו? מה אתם רוצים מהחיים שלנו? מה לדעתך המוטיבציה מעבר להתלהבות הזאת והניסיון להניע את הדברים? האם זה אינטרס אמריקאי? האם ארצות הברית עושה לנו טובה? זה עושה טובה לפלסטינים? מה קורה? אני את המיקרופון שלי לא אתן לעולם. קודם כל, לעונג לי להיות פה. אני לא הייתי שם את עצמי במקום שר ההגנה ולנסה להבין להסביר את מניעה, אבל אני חושב שהסיבה העיקרית מדוע ארצות הברית מעורבת במרדף אחר השלום בין הישראלים לפלסטינים היא מפני שהיא מנסה לסייע לבת בריתה ישראל בהשגת דבר שהוא חשוב מאוד בסדר היום של ישראל. אני חושב שזה קודם כל העניין העיקרי, ואסור לנו לשכוח שהמוטיבציה לכל נשיא אמריקאי להיכנס אל תוך תהליך השלום היא לסייע לשותפה שלו בקידום צרכי הביטחון שלה. ישנן סיבות אחרות, אבל זו הסיבה העיקרית. האם זה הרגע המתאים? כן, התשובה היא כן. אני רוצה למנות כמה סיבות. מדוע? אחת מהאירוניות של המצב בהווה הוא אותו רעיון שלמרות שיש תוהו ובוהו בכל מקום סביבנו, מצרים, סוריה, הרי שהמעגל הפנימי, ישראל, הגדה המערבית וירדן, באופן מפתיע ובצורה ממש מדהימה מאוד מאוד שקט. בשלוש השנים האחרונות הוא ממש הוציא להורג את הרעיון שהעימות בין ישראל והפלסטינים, אם ייפטר, יפתור את כל הבעיות בעולם. היום אנחנו רואים שזה בכלל לא שייך. היום העימות הזה הצטמצם לעימות באמת בין ישראלים לפלסטינים, ומחוץ לאותם שחקנים שעדיין נמצאים במקום. היום האחרים מתמקדים בדבר הזה פחות, מפני שהיום המדינות האחרות עסוקות בדברים אחרים. האם זה גם כולל את ראיית הדברים בקרב הממשל האמריקאי? כי אני זוכרת שאמרו בזמנו שזה יכול לפגוע באינטרסים האמריקאים. אתה אומר שזה לא לעניין, זה לא זה. אתה אומר שללא ספק זה עניין אסטרטגי של ארצות הברית לפתור את הדבר. מה, פשוט לפתור את הסכסוך? אני חושב שאף פקיד אמריקאי בכיר לא מאמין שאם העימות בין הפלסטינים והישראלים יימשך, או שהפתרון של העימות הישראלי-הפלסטיני אכן מעצם עצמו יפתור את כל הבעיות הקיימות בעולם מגיברלטר לקטר. אולי אנשים חשבו את זה בזמנו, חשבו את זה בשעתו. אנחנו עדיין שומעים פה ושם כמה מנהיגים ערביים, הם אומרים זאת בפומבי, אבל מעולם לא שמעתי פקיד בכיר שאומר, כאשר הוא נוסע ליריאד או לקיירו או לבחריין או לקטר או לכווית, שזה חלק מסדר היום של האמריקאים. ומדי אנחנו מעורבים, מדוע? זה לא שכאילו ראש הממשלה שלכם לא רוצה שנהיה מעורבים, להפך. יש לפחות 3 סיבות מדוע הדבר הזה גם באינטרס של ישראל, כדי שארצות הברית תהיה מעורבת. קודם כל, התועלות האסטרטגיות, איך ישראל יכולה לשפר את מעמדה בעולם כולו, ואיך היא יכולה למנוע כל מיני דברים שליליים לקרות באירופה, במקומות אחרים, וכמובן גם התועלת הטקטית. אי אפשר להפריד בין מה שעושה ג'ון קרי בזירה האסטרטגית מהזירה המבצעית. אם אתם תתבוננו היטב בטקטיקה שהוא משתמש בה, הרי ללא ספק הטקטיקה שלה מיועדת ליצור תועלת לצד הישראלי באותן נקודות מפתח שהן חשובות. יש כמובן גם התועלת הפוליטית. הרי ראש הממשלה של ישראל מאוד חשוב שיראה כאדם שמחפש שלום. לכן אנחנו לא שומעים את ראש הממשלה של ישראל אומר, אנא, ג'ון קרי, אל תבוא לישראל. הוא לא היה אומר זאת, אבל גלעד, I would like to continue, yes, can... In fact, I want to connect to what the Minister of Defense said. The Minister of Defense says that the problem is that people within Israel are persisting to talk about the fact that the status quo is impossible, and that demographic threats, and also make plans like your institute plans for unilateral withdrawal. You heard Abu Mazen 2 weeks ago say, so we heard him now as well. These are two different things. Actually, Gilead, you are the problem. Well, it's a great honor for me. We look at the long term, and we're saying that we want a state of Israel, which will be a state with a Jewish majority, and it's not by accident. We want a democratic state. We want it to be legitimate. We wanted to have national security, as we all understand this term in the widest sense of the word. That you cannot do when we are in the territories, and therefore we assume that perhaps the negotiations will happen and it will come out wonderful. After hundreds or thousands of hours of negotiations, we will reach a permanent agreement which will be the end of conflict and end of claims. But perhaps we will not succeed. And then what? How long are we going to wait? What are we going to wait for? And to what kind of borders are we putting ourselves in? Yes, but you understand, when a Minister of Defense that is now in the government, and we are 3 months before the end of the first period that we're talking about prolonging the period, he says, First of all, we don't have to solve it. Two, time works in our benefit. Do you see any chance whatsoever that this round is going to end differently? This round can end, in my opinion, with a thinner piece of paper, maybe, with all sorts of reservations on both sides, and this paper can lead towards a continuation of dialogue. It can lead to partial agreements. It definitely is not going to bring about a permanent agreement, not in the near future, although all the core issues are soluble. But the way there is not clear. That's why we're saying, come, let's prepare a plan which will be responsible, alternative, that can complete this negotiation and create in the meantime a reality of 2 states for 2 peoples until there will be an agreement, so that we do not continue to deteriorate towards a binational state, which can be either a state of inequality or Jewish-Palestinian state. This is not what our founding forefathers were thinking about. We will like to hear your reaction. Gilad says we have to plan ahead, and actually if I translate him, we cannot put all the eggs in the Palestinian basket for them to determine our fate. From what I saw, the arguments of the right, I know, but what caught my eye and things that you told me before the discussion is actually a new component. You say you do not read the map. You're talking about agreement and arrangements, and I'm talking about a religious Middle East, and all your agreements, with all due respect, are not worth the paper they're written on vis-à-vis the Quran or the Torah.
Yes, it's excellent for the question. It can really accentuate the things and underpin them. I think, as a matter of principle, to say that you are expressing one very essential side. I don't want to say that I am congratulating, but let us say that I am satisfied with the fact that this distinguished institute is preparing a program, let's call it the Israeli plan, with tremendous responsibility and accountability, independently of the Palestinian side. As we heard and as you said, the dependence on the Palestinian side has no expectancy. I mean, we know that the chronicles are well known. And unfortunately, I second this pessimism vis-à-vis the Palestinian side. I would like to say that the Minister of Justice said that the educational side is basic, it's elementary. In any reality that we live in the last 120 years of Zionism, and that is the crux. So the question is, what is the existential Jewish existence here in Israel, and does it actually feel that its destiny depends on others? And I think that this is a sanctified principle. Religious will say everything is please God, and we are responsible for ourselves. Yes, with the help of God, we are responsible for our deeds, and we have to do the right things for the redemption of the Jewish people. If you're talking about their views of the religious national parties here, you cannot start exploring by what the religious say, because they do not necessarily represent an ideological stance. There are also left-wingers. I think that even the left-wingers, by the way, are being led by people with skull caps and kippah on their heads through ideological reasoning. But I think that you have to find things in the words of the Torah. So if you look at the media, if you look at the various interpretations of the weekly portion that are published in the paper, and what are the men of letters say. But if we follow up on what you're saying, I'm trying to skip ahead. There's nothing to skip ahead with. No, but I need to sort of advance because of time is of the essence here from the point of view of the agenda. So if you're looking at various sort of divine decrees, we can say that anyone who really believes things like that, but says, okay, time is working in their benefit, but I think we're looking for an arrangement. What you're saying is we're talking about you have to start counting the kippot and the actual scarves over, the religious head coverings. No, but I'm talking about something else slightly, and I think that this was a main failure in the Oslo Accords, that it was done beside people with suits and ties without really understanding the religious ideology behind everything and what was really, and who the partners are. And I do sit down with Muslim religious leaders here in Israel and other places around the world, and there is a discourse. I'm talking even about the hardcore Gaza Strip people that I've met with outside our borders. And first of all, I would like to say, and we have to understand that there is no such thing as the end of claims and the end of the dispute. The religious language is the only one that can live with that kind of situation, because the end of the dispute, they say, are in the hands of Allah, not in our hands. In other words, we have to live in this land under these skies with the knowledge that we have to arrange our lives without waiting for the flesh and blood of human beings to end the dispute. Unfortunately, we have a historical horizon which is ad infinitum, and they can come and say that God, who is the God of this land, will decide what is going to happen and whose hands the Temple Mount is going to be in. So basically what you're saying, that it would be more convenient if there was an Islamic authority like the Hamas on one side, because if there's a secular entity, it takes you to a different sort of direction, often a tandem. No, I would say that we've forgotten that this is non-constitutional. They will always be blamed, the secular people will always be blamed of treason if they do anything with Israel. It's only the religious people can give any legitimization to any agreements, and the same in Israel, by the way, as it is. Only the religious clerics and other people have the capability of saying there is something called a Jewish people, and until the religious clerics, the Muslim ones, say that there is a Jewish people vis-a-vis, I'm not asking them to say a national homeland for the Jewish people, but even to say that a Jewish homeland, a Jewish people. When I spoke to them and had those talks, they said, yes, there's a very deep dispute on this land, but there is a Jewish people. They actually admitted it wholeheartedly. But from the moment we reach an understanding that we do not have a true partner for an immediate agreement for the curbing and the end of that dispute, and we are considering an alternative and a contingency plan, then I would propose to the institution to have an internal Israeli dialogue about where do we withdraw to, how do we withdraw, where to, how many, and all the ins and outs and the nitty-gritty. In other words, do all the benefits of this, are the benefits greater than this internal rift that we're going to create within Israel? Unfortunately, we have to have that discussion courageously and internally in Israel. Let us now bring the Hamas into this equation now, because the Minister of Security, of Defense, and the American ambassador yesterday, they spoke about the weakening of the Hamas as another point. It is being perceived as that could cause this round to look different. Do you agree with that? Have you identified an advantage of the position of the Hamas at the moment? They're weakening. I agree wholeheartedly. But first I would like to react by saying to something that Rabbi Gisser said. One of the reasons for this complex situation that we find ourselves in and for our incapability to advance is that on both sides they give a veto to their religious clerics. And if we want to release ourselves of that, then we need to take the veto back, that right of veto back. But let us now talk about the Hamas that represents ostensibly this side. In what way did they give the religious people in Israel a right of veto? Where did it happen here, and where did it happen in the Palestinian Authority? I think in the Palestinian Authority it's happening through the Hamas actions by preventing us reaching an agreement. And on our side, it's happening through the steps taken by the political religious parties preventing an agreement, reaching an agreement. And I think it's symmetrical, and I think we have to remove that right of veto from their hands. Now, if you look at the Hamas, they are the big elephant in the room. There's no way of truly dealing with it, and therefore they seem to ignore it. So if you look at the actual statesmanship process at the moment, if we do reach an agreement with Ashraf, which is the government basically in Ramallah, the PLO, and we will reach it after all. It'll take time. And we're speaking just about the next few months till April. But in the best scenario, they will bring about a memorandum agreement, but that's still not something that will be implemented. So we will reach that. Then we will implement that on the West Bank, to Judea and Samaria. But we won't implement it in the Gaza Strip. And we will wait, and we will see what will happen. No one has a solution. I think that at this point in time, that's the wrong attitude to be adopted, because very important changes have taken place. And before I'm perceived as the Minister of Defense said, and I agree with him on certain points, various upheavals that have taken place in the Arab world have created not only threats but also opportunities. The Hamas has been weakened from a military point of view, from a political point of view, and they were weakened because they were disconnected from their assistance arms in the Gaza Strip. They had to disconnect from the Syria and Hezbollah because of the civil strife in Syria. They were punished by Iran because of that, and therefore with Iran they also severed the ties, and they were hoping that the new Islamic players would help them. So where do you identify an opportunity in all this? The opportunity is that the moment the Hamas is weakened, then one
והוא קרא לזה הסדרה כי במערכת הביטחון אוהבים להמציא שמות חדשים. אני קורא לזה שם מאוד ישן, שקוראים לו הכלה, containment באנגלית. אנחנו לא יודעים מה לעשות עם עזה, אז נכיל אותה. נכיל אותה על ידי אמצעים צבאיים, נכיל אותה על ידי אמצעים כלכליים, פתיחה, סגירה של המעברים וכו'. אני חושב שכתוצאה מהשינויים הדרמטיים האלה במזרח התיכון, יש הזדמנות לשקול אסטרטגיות אחרות. אסטרטגיה אחת היא לחזור לאסטרטגיה של מיטוט, של הפלה. אפשר ליצור פה קואליציה שתהיה מורכבת מהרשות הפלסטינית, אש"ף, ממצרים, ממדינות סוניות נוספות במזרח התיכון, מישראל ומארצות הברית ואולי שחקניות מערביות נוספות, ולבנות תוכנית שלא תביא מיד למיטוט החמאס, אבל יש תקווה שתביא בהמשך. אפשר לשקול גם אסטרטגיה חליפית, וזה לנצל את החולשה של החמאס על ידי הנעתו לכיוון של הצטרפות למחנה העיקרי בעם הפלסטיני, המחנה שסביב פתח, אש"ף.
אבל אז זה שתי אופציות שאתה מניח.
זה שתי דרכים שונות לחלוטין.
ואם היו שואלים אותך במה היית בוחר בקצרה?
אני נטיית ליבי היא להתחיל בהתחלה לנסות את הדרך השנייה. משום שלדעתי אם נגיע למצב שהקונסנזוס בעם הפלסטיני שאת הסכסוך עם ישראל צריך לפתור בדרך מדינית יהיה רחב יותר, זה יותר טוב. אני לא בטוח שזה יצליח.
כן, הפיל
בחדר. אם זה נכשל, נעבור לאסטרטגיה השנייה.
אני חושבת שמה ששמענו כאן מהרב גיסר, שזה בעצם גם צריך להיות בתמונת מראה לציבור בחמאס. זאת אומרת, אתה רוצה לקחת גוף דתי ולנסות להוביל אותו בדרך של משא ומתן מדיני. אני מיד אשאל לך שאלה, ואני רוצה רגע, I want to ask you, Mr. Satloff, how much time does Israel have when you look at it from the corridors of, you know, the State Department or the corridors of the White House? Is this something, is this the last chance? Is it going to be okay? As you know, I think Tom Friedman always says, call us when you're ready. He always quotes, who was it? Baker. Tom says he was quoting him. No, really, you see, because I think we have to, what is the price, what price, if there will be a price, will Netanyahu pay for saying, I heard you, it's not going to happen?
Look, first, I apologize for being a historian, and I think it's important to remember. The two-state solution, it was called something different, was first proposed 75 years ago. It is the only idea that has withstood this the test of time. Maybe its time has not yet come.
You know, I'm just going to interfere for a second and say that if you go back to the map, of the original map, you see how much insight was there, because they wanted to give the Galil to the Arab state and the Negev to the
לתת בעצם את הגליל למדינה הערבית, ואתם יכולים לראות את החלוקה של הנגב למדינה היהודית. אז באמת, 75 שנה היו כבר תובנות. אז אני בעצם חושב שתהיה חלוקה מחדש של פלסטינה ההיסטורית. האם זה יקרה מחר? אני ממש בספק. האם הנסיבות הם כאלה שמעוררות אפשרות היום? אני בספק. האם ארצות הברית תחליט לא להיות מעורבת אם ישראל לא תרצה בכך, או שכן תרצה בכך? אני לא בטוח. האם ארצות הברית תתרחק ותרחיק את עצמה מישראל אם בגלל שישראל לא יכולה לבצע א' ב' ג'? לא סביר. ואני חושב שמאוד חשוב להביט, הייתי מאוד ביקורתי נגד הממשל של אובמה, אבל מאוד חשוב לראות את האבולוציה של לאן ג'ון קרי הגיע, ולמשל איפה היה הממשל לפני 5 שנים, איך השינויים חלו. הרי קודם כל היישובים היה תנאי בלתי, שבכלל אי אפשר היה לערער בקיומם כדי שיהיו מעורבים בכל תהליך השלום. אנחנו בעצם איבדנו 4 שנים, זאת הייתה שגיאה מהותית ביותר. ועכשיו אנחנו מעורבים בצורה בונה ביותר וקונסטרוקטיבית יותר בין שני הממשלות הללו. הרי מה שני הדברים שאני זקוק להם? אני צריך את ההכרה בישראל ואני צריך נוכחות בעצם בעמק הירדן. ומה ג'ון קרי אומר לעומת מה שנתניהו אמר? נוכחות בעמק הירדן והכרה בישראל כמולדת העם היהודי. זה מאוד קשה יהיה לראש ממשלת ישראל לבוא ולהגיד, תשכחו מזה. הרי אם ייתנו לו את רוב מה שהוא ביקש, האם זה סוף הסיפור? רוב הסיכויים שלא, אבל אנחנו חייבים להכיר בעובדה שיש בעצם אנשים חכמים ביותר בוושינגטון שהם הבינו לעומק את העניין. אנחנו צריכים לחשוב עד כמה אנחנו להשקיע בדבר הזה, האם אנחנו רוצים להתרחק מדברים אחרים שקורים במקום אחרים, האם אנחנו רוצים לשנות בעצם את כל בני הברית פה באזור, האם אנחנו מדברים על שינוי במעורבות שלנו עם הסונים או האחרים. הרי הממשלה בישראל לא מסכימה איתנו בכל מיני דברים מהותיים, אבל מה, אנחנו נתרחק מהם בגלל זה? כל אלה זה סוגיות אחרות, אבל אם אנחנו מדברים על הנושא מיקרו של הדיון הזה, ארצות הברית היא בעמדה הרבה יותר מוצלחת מאשר הייתה לפני 5 שנים. In other words, what we're trying to say is the policy of the right-wingers and of this government, and Benjamin Netanyahu, after all, he still has an allegiance to what he believed in. Now, the situation of the circumstances of the negotiations are much closer to what the foundations were of the right-wingers and what they said at the beginning. So perhaps it's lucky that you didn't succeed in the past, because now the principles may be those that are much closer to the basic principles. So if Bibi Netanyahu knows that he's not going to pay a price, then why should he exert an effort now? I think that the price that we're paying is because we're not separating ourselves from the Palestinians, and we're paying additional prices aggregated every single day. I think that the right Zionist thing to do is to separate ourselves from the Palestinians, and I sincerely hope that we'll sincerely do it through negotiations and an accord, and there are plenty in the audience who were present in previous rounds of negotiations. They're going to be the same solutions in the same negotiations, and ultimately we'll reach the same solutions about the settlements and the border borders and about Jerusalem and the Old City, vis-à-vis refugees and security. These are things that one cannot play around with much. You're putting all the initiatives and all the negotiations that have happened in the past, and unfortunately the margins are very, very narrow. But you can declare openly that perhaps it's a lot better than it was before, but basically it's more of the same. So that's what we're directing towards. I would like my time to devote and give to Rabbi Avi Gisser. And I think, can you think for a moment about how together we can raise the flag of a democratic Jewish state based on our fundamental beliefs, and do so while leading to a two-state solution? Because ultimately that is what we want to reach. Those are the values that we want to protect. Is there such a flag and a banner that we can raise together in that discourse that you wanted to present? It's our internal discourse, which is extremely important, I think. And I think we will take it with us in the Institute as you proposed, and we will work on it. Can you envision the settlers, those couple of thousands who live beyond any border that we delineate? We will delineate that actual line. Can you see an evacuation, a dismantling of settlements through an internal Israeli legitimization of it at any point in an accord? Can you see those being dismantled?
If we start the inner discourse, let's announce its beginning. It's not the first time that we're discussing among ourselves. The basic assumptions for the Zionist discourse of ours that I really want is, first of all, the scroll of independence, not just the last segment, but the opening. In the land of Israel, the Jewish people was established. If we look at the land of Israel, the Jewish people were established in Hebron, in Beit El, in Jerusalem. That's where the Jewish people rose, and that's where the prophets prophesied at the time, and that's where it bequeathed the Torah. So we have to agree on these basic assumptions. Can we be today in Hebron, Shiloh, and Jerusalem for the same Rabbi Gisser, look, just allow me, because allow me, because we're competing with lunch and a very important movie. Then I now announcing the opening of the dialogue, and there was a television program on Channel 1 which is fascinating, but I want to push you to the end. I suppose you won't agree about anything, but let's say that something happens, and then in this round, just as last year we didn't believe that the incredible will happen, let's say that we have to make a decision, and in this decision of a referendum, there is a decision to evacuate 4 isolated settlements, or 10. You'll have to take settlers back into agreed borders. Can you tell me today that the public, that I'm not sure that you represent all of it, but the public that went through the disengagement will support us, or can we take into account that there may be a price of civil war at the fringes, or maybe separation to a land of Judea? Just yesterday on the news they said they were going to declare a Judean state. Where is that as far as the inner discourse? No, there will not be in Israel a war, a civil war. There will not be, unless I will see a nightmare that I cannot predict now. Will not be. A few criminals, that's a different story, but there will be no civil war in Israel. If the internal discourse and the deep conviction of benefits as opposed to the current situation, it will be quite clear. Look, for example, we already evacuated out of these terrible, terrible demonstrations, even during the peace process with Egypt. But there, the benefits were obvious. It was agreed upon. It was wall-to-wall, almost. It has to be wall-to-wall, so that there will be also a level of agreement on the most difficult prices in their Zionist depth. I would like to summarize, because we have lunch after us, not a lecturer. Lunch is much more important. So many years you've been looking at these things. Can you share with us
we've been doing this for so long.
אנחנו עושים את הדברים כל כך הרבה. כשהלכנו לגלעד הוא אמר שזה כבר 20 שנה מתנהל, אבל אם אתה חושב על הזמן שממש ממש היינו במשא ומתן זה לא כל כך הרבה. אנחנו עוסקים בדבר הזה במשך הקריירה שלך. כאשר אתה עוסק בדבר הזה אתה יכול לחלוק עמנו אולי רגע אחד של הבנה שיש לכם אולי רגע של התפכחות, שאתם לא ראיתם את הדברים נכוחה. אנחנו אומרים שהמנהיגים שלנו לפעמים מתפכחים. What did you change your mind from the other side? What did you see that you didn't think about before? I didn't prepare myself for this question, but it happened to me actually in the beginning of started to deal with the negotiations, because if you go into it without any background, and we are all defense security people, we didn't have any background. We saw the other side only through the portfolios that the Minister of Defense mentioned, and all of a sudden you meet the people themselves face to face. And you find out that you can talk to them, you can come to agreement with them, and you find out another thing, which was the most extreme as far as I was concerned, that those that we thought were the worst, those that we used to put under the title terrorists, very often these were the ones that you could reach agreement with, much easier than the others. Because they really, they fought us. They had the conflicts with us. They were not those that in Israel they called that they would walk around with suits and ties in all sorts of dinner parties. Rabbi Gisser, what did you learn? Something that you can say that you heard from the other side, and that's an argument that you adopt. Something that changed your frame of mind. I will continue in his frame of mind. You start to see that those religious people, that to you they look the most threatening and frightening thing in the region, they are the ones who have the authority. These are the ones who have an ideological structure that enables them to accept compromise and accept the other. It's true that in the interim period until the solution comes, but we can talk about interim period, which is significant. And that I learned how to see the other, the enemy, so to speak, as one who can actually be rational. And another question, allow me, because and I continue with the same line of thought. In the juncture, if you say that the best dialogue you had with religious people, and in this juncture you have to choose between a democratic state and a halachic state, where do you go to? I don't understand your question. I don't have such a juncture. Actually, as a Jewish state is a state where by virtue has a democratic nature, so there's no such thing. Gilead, what about you?
No, I want to, so just, I'm going to give Robert but I'm going to ask you differently.
אני רוצה לשאול אותך בצורה שונה.
What do you think
מה לדעתך
can make the difference?
יכול לחולל את השינוי?
Where do you see the difference looking at the region?
כאשר אתה מתבונן באזור, איפה אתה רואה את השינוי?
Look, just 15 seconds.
15 שניות. קודם כל הערה לגבי העניין הזה הדתי, אני חובש את הכובע של אדם שעוסק בפוליטיקה ערבית, ואני מבקר כאן במדינה יהודית. האמת היא שמישהו שחי שנים בארצות מוסלמיות תמיד נתקל בדבר הזה, והרושם שלי הוא שאם היו עושים סקר אמיתי, הדבר הזה יראה שהמוסלמים נהנים מבירה טובה או מוויסקי בדיוק באותה מידה שיהודים נהנים משרימפס. פירוש הדבר, יש איזה מין הבחנה כללית שהמוסלמים כמעט כולם הם מה שהיית אומר דתיים, אבל הם לא. הם גם כן במגוון עצום של כל מיני אמונות, בדיוק כמו היהודים, כל מיני זרמים. וכל יודע שבישראל בימים אלה המסעדות, יש הרבה יותר מסעדות כשרות שנפתחות מאשר לא כשרות. אם אתה נוסע בצפון במקומות שיש תיירים, הדברים משתנים. אני לא אוכלת כשר, ואמרתי לאחת מהעמיתים שלי, אני רוצה להיכנס עם ילדיי, ולא יכולתי למצוא מסעדה הגונה. אומר, סוף סוף הצלחנו. כל העניין הוא להימנע מלייחס לצד השני איזה משהו כללי, אחיד, זה פשוט לא ככה. אני הייתי אומר, אם תתבונן במזרח התיכון, ואתה צריך לתת הבחנה כוללת, אנחנו צריכים לזרוק החוצה את המונחים כמו המזרח התיכון, או הערבים כך וכך. לקח שנלמד בשלוש השנים האחרונות באזור הזה הוא כמה דברים נהפכו להיות לאומיים ולאומנים. מה שקרה במצרים זה עניין מצרי, זה לא עניין ערבי. מה שקורה בתימן ובלוב זה קשור לתימנים וללובים. סוריה רק מתחילה עכשיו להיות משהו מעבר לסוריה. כלומר, אני ממש מתנגד לרעיון שסייקס פיקו הולך ומתמוטט. אני חושב שיש הרבה יותר משמעות היום לגבולות במזרח התיכון משהיו בעבר, וישראל היא בללא ספק יש לה תמריץ גדול מאוד, יש לה אינטרס אסטרטגי עצום בשמירה על המבנה המדיני במזרח הקרוב. אני אומר לכם שיש לנו אינטרס מאוד מאוד חשוב כאמריקאים, ואנחנו צריכים לעשות את הדבר הזה מבעד לעדשה הזאת. מעבר למאיך שאנחנו מסתכלים באופן כללי על המזרח התיכון היום. יכולנו להמשיך, אבל עלינו לעצור. אני רוצה להודות לחברי הפאנל על כך שחלקו את דעתם. And now we try all the time to understand the question, what can we do and what's the solution, where it takes us. We always ask in these conferences people who write about it or act in it. And Gilead, you had a very good idea to ask the same question, what should we do for a better future to Israel regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? People who get up in the morning, look for solutions for difficult issues and do not despair if they're told that they're going the wrong way. You ask Nobel laureates, and luckily we have quite a few of them, and also justices. So we shall thank you, and we invite you to look at